Previously on the business.
The United States has woken up this morning, or in fact, they're just waking up now and breathing a little sigh of relief. Let's go to Astrid Ascar, who is our regular contributor here on the show. Welcome. Good morning, Astrid.
Good morning, Ian. Good morning, Kriya.
Good morning, Astrid.
So let's start at the very beginning, because we saved a nice juicy piece of this conversation from yesterday to hold it over to today to find out what was going on. Astrid, talk us through it. What has happened since we last chatted?
Okay, so let's take a look at the context. Let's go back 16 days. I think let's start there. And really, effectively, what happened was the Republican Party was hijacked by its far right wing. And this is a group of people they call the Tea Party, led by a guy called Ted Cruz, who has intentions to lead the Republican Party in the next American election. So that was the underlying context. And basically what they did is they hijacked the vote, which meant that there was a bill that needed to be voted through Congress to increase the U.S.'s debt ceiling. And the debt ceiling we spoke about yesterday, that's really the limit which is placed on the U.S. government, the U.S. Treasury, to borrow more money. Mm-hmm. So what they did, they convinced people not to vote in favor of this bill, which meant that by 6 a.m. South African time today, which would have been midnight in the States, the U.S. would have effectively run out of any more permissions to borrow more money, and it's sitting with a debt burden, as are most governments in the world, if not all governments in the world. And that was kind of the context. So yesterday we saw some frantic maneuvering, secret phone calls being made. If you watched the press conference yesterday at the White House, the journalists were very keen to know how involved the president actually was in trying to get the Democrats and the Republicans to sit down and reach some kind of agreement. Democrats trying to convince the Republicans to allow this bill to go through so that they could raise the debt ceiling, borrow the money they need to borrow in order to pay the debts that are due at the end of this month. And the Republicans saying, we're not going to give you that unless you make some changes to something called Obamacare, which we can talk about in a minute. So it's actually a political motivation that's going on here, a lot of politicking going on. Let's not forget, next year, midterm elections in the U.S., so that's really what they're all gunning for. What happens is they eventually reach an agreement by close of business yesterday, but that revised bill still had to go through 2 votes. So they had to revise some parliamentary legislation, Ian, which is quite interesting. I don't know if we could pull that off in this country that quickly, because they weren't sure whether it would go through the Senate first or something called the House of Representatives. Eventually it went through both houses, and the president was literally sitting at his desk waiting for this new bill to arrive so that he could sign it and the U.S. government could open again. That's where we are today. The U.S. government will open again. Those people who've been at home with no pay will go back to work. They will be paid at the end of the month. They'll be able to meet their payments, their mortgage bond payments, etc., etc. And effectively what they've done is they've set 2 new deadlines. And this is the interesting part on the whole story, because we all breathe a sigh of relief today thinking, sure, we're out of the woods, because America catches a cold. America sneezes, rather, when the world catches a cold. Not out of the woods. What they've done is the term that's being used by the commentators is they've effectively just kicked the can down the road. So they've got 2 new deadlines looming large. So we might go through all of this again. The first deadline is government has agreed to pay the bills to fund government so that government doesn't have to shut down. The Senate's agreed to pay those bills until January the 15th, 2014. There is another debt ceiling deadline, and that is February the 7th. So we could be sitting and going through all of this again. Effectively, what happened, if you think about it, they've kind of delayed the symptoms of a default, but they haven't really addressed the problem, the root problem.
And is this something that we need to keep our eye on from a political point of view as well? I suppose that the economies of the world, the world's stock markets, etc., are also looking now to Obama and finding out, as you said, with midterm elections coming up, that's going to play a big role, obviously, in the whole kind of thing causing havoc again, really.
Absolutely. That's exactly what's going to go on. I mean, the Republicans have their political standpoint. The Democrats have their political standpoint. Republicans are a little bit all over the show, but they've conceded defeat on this one, a political defeat. The problem is those Tea Party guys are still floating around, and they still have a voice, and they're not going to go away. So it kind of suits the Democrats in a way. They could raise the same objections down the line. They didn't really get what they wanted out of this negotiated settlement yesterday. They got a couple of concessions, but not exactly what they were after.
But the big one that is looming large, and as you said, they conceded defeat this time round, is Obamacare. That is something which is huge, isn't it?
Yeah, and what the Republicans' problem with Obamacare is, they've got a long list of things they've been challenging. Of course, Obamacare came into effect about 2-3 weeks ago. It's law, it's legislated, it's happening. But what their big bugbear with it is that there are about 30 million Americans who've not contributed to any kind of health insurance over the years because of their income level. And they automatically are now able to qualify for some kind of national medical health cover. And the Republicans aren't very happy about that. Let's not forget, a lot of the money, a lot of the wealth in the states sits in that Republican Party. They control a lot of the businesses. They control a lot of the big corporates. So they're not too happy about having to foot the bill for 30 million Americans, many of whom are immigrants as well, naturalized Americans, not born in the States, to get some kind of reduced medical cover. And effectively, that's what lies at the root of the problem. But they linked that issue with the debt ceiling and the debt burden, and that was really probably where they went wrong strategically on a political level. The two aren't truly related, and that's why Obama dug his heels in and said they're separate issues. We can discuss Obamacare again, but don't forget it's law. It's been through Senate. It's been through the House of Representatives. But that's got nothing to do with our debt burden.
I'd like to bring it home for 2 seconds. We're off to the UK in a minute now to go and chat to Joe Meller, who is from the London Economist, and I want to hear about this from a European point of view and from a British point of view. But just from a South African point of view, this news now, as we go into the afternoon, how does this affect the markets and our economy back in South Africa? Effectively no change?
Effectively no change. Our markets have been pretty stable. Dow Jones was up 200 points yesterday, so we'll see what the JSE does today by close of business. But the markets were pretty resilient against this, kind of having faith that the world's biggest economy will find some kind of solution to this issue. And a couple of things that people don't realize, Ian, I know you've got to go, but America's been in debt forever. The debt ceiling has actually been raised 14 times under Presidents Bush and Obama.
Yep.
So this is not the first time we faced this situation. I think there's only 1 year ever that the federal government in the U.S. has been without debt. So our economies obviously track that economy. They track that as the world's currency. And I think you should ask the guys in the UK, ask them about the China angle on this. China is sitting on a lot of that debt. China would have been one of the creditors that would have had to be paid out by the end of the month. So that's where the effect would come in on our economy because, of course, China becoming a very, very big player on the world's economy and influencing stock markets around the world as well.
All right, Astrid, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you for your time this morning. We'll see you next week on the show.
Great.
Thanks so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
The Business. Weekdays 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. on balls.co.za. Brought to you by FNB Business Banking.